You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 24th of February 2026 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. This is The Globalist, broadcasting to you live from Midori House in London. I'm Georgina Godwin. On the show ahead...
This is a setback and a message we didn't want to send today, but the work continues.
As we mark the 4th anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, deep divisions still exist within Europe on sanctions packages against Moscow. We'll look back at the conflict so far and forward to what might happen next. Then,
the illegal station of the Russian troops on our territory is definitely a source of instability. It's a source of threat that we cannot control.
We'll explore the possibility of contagion in the region with the Defence Minister of Moldova. We'll ask if Washington's intervention might kill the deal the UK has reached to hand the Chagos Islands to Mauritius. We'll be in Istanbul to look through the front pages, and we'll catch up with proceedings at the International Criminal Court as the former leader of the Philippines, Rodrigo Duterte, faces a pre-trial hearing on accusations of crimes against humanity. We'll hear about a new film examining Lebanon's National Archive, and we'll end with a roundup of aviation news. That's all ahead here on The Globalist, live from London. First, a look at what else is happening in the news. Canada is preparing aid for Cuba as sweeping US efforts to block oil supplies deepen fuel shortages and raise fears of a humanitarian crisis on the island. France has barred US Ambassador Charles Kushner from meeting government officials after he failed to attend a summons over embassy comments on a deadly far-right killing. And British politician Peter Mandelson has been released on bail following his arrest over allegations he shared market-sensitive information linked to the Epstein files. Do stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on those stories. Now, 4 years ago today, Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. On the occasion of this grim anniversary, I'm joined now by Monocle researcher and writer Julia Jen, who is from Ukraine. Julia, many thanks for coming in today, and I know that it's quite an emotional time for you and your family. And so I'd like to start on a highly personal note. How has the war in your country affected your life?
Thank you, Georgina. Well, I guess it's exposed me to the ugliness of war. I understand some of what war is, which isn't something I'd ever really understood before because, of course, I was just a sheltered child in Europe and I didn't know what war was. I know what it means to lose someone in quite devastating circumstances. You know, there was someone in my life, in my childhood, a young man, a very close friend of one of my uncles, who died in the most horrific circumstances on the front line. And I know what that means to understand that I'd seen someone in the flesh and that, you know, that wasn't a reality anymore. And that's quite heartbreaking. I've understood what it means to be under bombardment. I understand what it means that, you know, you think, oh, I might die now or I might suffer, you know, unbelievable damage to my body. And that understanding that your body is so fragile, that's something that is really difficult to comprehend. And of course, I've seen my family's lives turn upside down. War changes absolutely everything. I think there's some perhaps romanticization of it. You know, we read about it in poetry or in literature, we see it in films, but really all it does is cripple a life that maybe was blossoming before. And, you know, suddenly become reliant on other people. You become a refugee. I've seen all of this happen to my family, and I've seen my family members, for example, becoming part of the military. And that's a step that is very difficult because your life is no longer your own. Your life is entirely controlled by your country and what your country needs.
Absolutely. That old lie, as Wilfred Owen calls it, dulce et decorum est pro patria mori. Sometimes it's very difficult to die for the glory of your country. Beyond the personal, the ramifications of this have spread far beyond Ukraine's borders. Volodymyr Zelensky said in a media interview a couple of days ago that World War III has already started. What did he mean by that?
I think what Zelensky is talking about there is the axis of evil. So we've seen a number of countries really stepping behind Russia to enable Russia to continue this war on Ukraine. So, of course, we've seen China. China is the great enabler. That's what sort of is being referred to as the last 4 years would have been impossible for Russia without China. We've seen China supplying Russia with absolutely critical sort of components, technological components that are then used to make Russian rockets, drones, missiles, military tech. And of course, we've seen other countries stepping behind Russia. Iran's development of this Shahed drone, or Gabara drone as it's also now known, is sort of absolutely critical. So that's the kind of thing that I heard, for example, exploding over my head and around me. This drone is, automated. So it's sort of sent out from a location in Russia. And sometimes it's reactive, which means it's kind of got a higher payload inside. And it will just be honing in on a particular target. Sometimes now they're even using AI to enable them to sort of bypass air defences very nimbly. And then, of course, we've seen North Korea. North Korea has committed actual manpower on the ground. So we know now that there are 10,000 North Korean soldiers on Russian soil and being deployed to Ukraine. And they're gaining this invaluable military experience, how to use a drone or how to kind of create a combat situation where they can successfully deploy. And that's what Zelensky is talking about. All these countries using this military experience behind Russia to then, influence other conflicts in the future, other wars in the future. So we know, for example, Russia and China working together will influence, if anything were to happen in Taiwan, what might happen on the ground there.
So you have the axis of evil, but you also have the allies, and Europe is largely supportive of Kyiv. Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission, and the President of the European Council, Antonio Costa, are visiting Kyiv today. But, of course, there is this huge row about sanctions. We've got Hungary and Slovakia kicking against all these measures that Europe is trying to implement. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so this is the 90 billion euro loan that was meant to be given from the EU to Ukraine. And it was meant to be sort of something that von der Leyen and Costa were bringing with them to Kyiv as a really kind of concrete example of European support for Ukraine. Hungary has blocked this. And Hungary and Slovakia are both very upset about the Druzhba pipeline, which ironically is actually the friendship pipeline. It's a sort of pipeline bringing energy in from Russia through Ukraine to the EU, to European countries. So, for example, Slovakia has halted emergency power supplies in the last 2 days to Ukraine because of this row. Supposedly, Ukraine is preventing energy from moving along that pipeline to Hungary and Slovakia, which have really attempted to foster very close ties, especially under Slovakia's recent elections under their new president, Fico. Fostering close ties with Russia and making the case for keeping European sort of options open in terms of using Russian power supplies. Slovakia's sort of halting of emergency power supplies to Ukraine is particularly leaves a bitter taste in the mouths for Ukrainians because one of the things I'm sure von der Leyen and Costa will be seeing in their visit to Kyiv today is how Europeans have supplied a huge number of generators to Ukrainians because, of course, this winter has been very difficult, in particular because Russia has been striking energy centres, power stations. So they have struck actually, in fact, every single power station in Ukraine in the last couple of months. And this has meant Ukrainians have been without power, not just in their homes, but also in hospitals and schools, in supermarkets. Supermarkets are open in the dark without proper refrigerated sort of amenities. And so von der Leyen and Costa will be seeing these generators, will be seeing how, the European public, the Poles, the Czechs, other nations have fundraised to provide these generators, and there Slovakia is blocking this emergency power supply to Ukraine. So it's very much a tale of two different approaches.
So as we take stock 4 years into this war now to the day, where are we in terms of negotiations? How close are we? How much of a possibility is there that this will not reach another anniversary?
I think the honest answer is we're not close at all. there's an understanding in the sort of analytical community beyond Ukraine. Of course, in Ukraine, there's a very clear view on this, but beyond Ukraine as well, if we look at what analysts are saying across Europe and the US, the US is not seen as a neutral sort of host of these negotiations. They are very much seen on Russia's side, pushing Ukraine to make compromises that are not, entirely necessary. Russia is on the back foot in many ways here. Ukraine has liberated quite significant, chunks of its territory in the last few weeks. Russia is now having more men killed on the front line than they are able to recruit. This is a big strategy of Ukraine's, is to use automated systems, drones, etc., to basically, show Russia that it can't gather enough manpower on the front line as it loses it. So there is very much a sense that if Ukraine is given the tools to fight off Russia's advances, that they can defend themselves properly. They just have to be given that chance, that support by its allies. But the US in the last 12 months, really under Donald Trump's presidency, has pivoted. And from where we've gone with Biden being particularly cautious about how he helps Ukraine, if we remember the days where Ukraine was told we can't strike inside Russian territory with US weapons, for example, which was very quickly sort of reversed and no particular, consequence was suffered as a result, despite all the fluster from Moscow. We've seen Trump very much interested in economic ties with the Russians, business deals, and also, I guess, the flattery that comes with an authoritarian friendship.
Julia, thank you so much for sharing that with us. That's Monocle researcher and writer Julia Jen, who is from Ukraine. This is The Globalist. Ukraine's closest neighbours have been at the sharp end of the economic disruption and security concerns over the last 4 years. Monocle's contributing editor Andrew Muller spoke to Moldova's Defence Minister Anatoly Nasati at this year's Munich Security Conference. He started by asking him about the threat from Russia.
There is a number of different incidents that violated our airspace that clearly indicate that Russia is still continuing to threatening us with their possible means. But some of the drone incidents could be a consequence of the vicinity of the war. So there might be both for purpose or as the drones was jammed or damaged, so they changed the trajectory and went to our territory. But depends on how far they went. So in some cases, it's a very big possibility that it was done for purpose.
Part of Moldovan territory is still occupied effectively by Russia. It's usually reported that there are about 1,500 Russian soldiers in Transnistria. Do you still regard them as any kind of active threat, that they might one day step beyond the boundaries of Transnistria, much as we saw in Ukraine in 2014?
The illegal station of the Russian troops on our territory definitely it's a source of instability. It's a source of threat that we cannot control. Of course, we monitor them, but their presence in nature and the presence of the big depot of ammunition and weapons in nature, they pose a sort of the threat to the national security.
But as Minister of Defence, are they something that Moldova's military actually consciously feels like they need to guard against?
Absolutely. First of all, we need to provide safe and secure environment. In the same time, to be ready for any kind of the scenarios that might pose the military threat to our citizens. So the main task for my troops is to prepare to defend the territory, to defend the citizens, but in the same time to prevent any kind of de-escalation.
Because there were reports, which obviously you would have seen reasonably recently, reports in the Ukrainian press certainly saying Ukrainian intelligence had suggested that in Transnistria reservists were being called up and weapons taken out of storage. Was there anything to that or not?
No. We monitor and we see constant training of the so-called regular troops of the so-called Transnistrian armed forces and other institutions that is coordinated by Russian troops that are on the ground, but something regarding the mobilization on something that is not typical for this kind of the activities was not registered.
But how possible, and I know we've spoken about this before, in the long term will be actually properly defending Moldova while sticking to that Article 11 in your constitution, which commits you to neutrality and forbids you from having other people's troops, even if they're allies, stationed on your territory. Is that going to be achievable in the long term? Can Moldova stay neutral and safe?
Regarding the status of Moldova and this status of the neutrality, it should be decided by the citizens of the Republic of Moldova, and it should go through the referendum. However, any kind of the advance in the peaceful solution of the so-called Transnistrian conflict, it should start with removal and evacuation of the illegal stationed Russian troops on our territory.
Is the Moldovan government, though, kind of working around Article 11? Because, as you know, we now have the EU is funding a cyber defence hub in association with Tallinn University in Estonia. Moldova is buying Czech-supplied Victor anti-aircraft units. The United States donating Humvees. There's that security partnership with the EU. I mean, Moldova is integrating itself into Western defence structures, isn't it?
Absolutely. So, neutrality, it's not an impediment to develop the national defense forces for the defense of the country. Neutrality, it doesn't mean isolation and the lack of the cooperation with our strategic partners that share the same democratical values. So we cannot say that we are neutral and do nothing. If we do so, we definitely do what Russia wants. To a weak Moldova, weak defense forces, weak institutions, and their possibility to divide the society and to impose their will on our country.
But still, is, I guess, what we might think of as Moldova's reunification basically the ultimate aim? And how big a risk is pursuing that, given that it might well prompt Russian escalation? It's a difficult balance, isn't it?
Yes, it's difficult because Russia still continues to maintain and support this uncontrolled territory to have a leverage on our domestic processes and not to allow us to advance even with our European Union integration agenda. So definitely we'll continue to see and to deal with the high level of the threats that coming as a hybrid threats. So they'll do whatever in order to achieve the strategic goal.
That's Moldova's Defence Minister Anatoly Nosati talking to Monocle's contributing editor Andrew Muller. Now, still to come on the programme.
The Lebanese are party animals. I mean, we love to live, basically, much more than we love to die.
We'll hear about a new film on Lebanon's National Archives. This is The Globalist.
Craft is a matter of perspective, a unique outlook, an obsessive attention to detail. With UBS's Chief Investment Office Houseview, we're focused on identifying the latest investment opportunities and market risks to help you achieve your financial goals, so you get the big picture broken down into thought-provoking insights. Delivered daily and curated by over 200 globally connected, locally active analysts. UBS. Banking is our craft.
It's 7:18 here in London. Let's continue with today's newspapers. And joining me is Ruth Michelson, who's a journalist and a Middle East correspondent based in Istanbul. Ruth, it's good to have you back with us. Let's continue talking about Ukraine on this grim anniversary, 4 years since Russia's full-scale invasion. And, of course, many headlines reporting that European leaders have lashed out at Hungary, accusing Viktor Orban's government of sabotaging this latest package of sanctions targeting Russia and a desperately needed loan for Ukraine. Tell us how this is being reported across the world.
Well, lots of attention on the different comments from European leaders. I mean, Poland's Prime Minister Donald Tusk described Hungary blocking this package of sanctions on Russia. As you say, the desperately needed loan for Ukraine, which needs it for its energy infrastructure. Donald Tusk calling what Hungary did political sabotage. I mean, this comes at this is mentioned in The Guardian. This is coming at a time when Ukrainians have endured this absolutely terrible winter, where Russia has targeted their Ukrainian energy infrastructure with drones and ballistic missile attacks. So the backlash from European leaders has been incredibly strong. There have been comments by Lithuania's foreign minister who said the EU must not become a hostage to Hungary because of Hungary's persistence in blocking sanctions on Russia.
And of course, this rumbles into a different conflict, that with Iran, because protests have reignited there. Donald Trump's hit back at reports that the Pentagon's top general has said that a looming military campaign against Iran could be risky. And one of the reasons he gives for that is Washington's ongoing defense of Israel, but also the support for Ukraine. This is the first time we've heard these remarks, even though they were made some days ago. And Trump is really pushing back on them.
Yes, I mean, one of the things about this is that these are remarks that apparently surfaced in a meeting last week. But, now we have time. A news cycle is enough for there to be reports that the Pentagon's top general has made these remarks. And then Donald Trump tries to quash it with, of course, a social media post. That doesn't necessarily mean the information is going to go away. So these are reports that came out in the Washington Post, in Axios and others, that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Kane, has been advising Donald Trump and other top US officials that any military campaign against Iran, obviously, that's something that is looming in this part of the world right now. He has warned that this could carry significant risks, including the possibility of becoming entangled in a prolonged conflict. And yes, there are also reports that he has warned that the US just might not have enough munitions, or the stockpiles of US munitions may not be enough because they've been depleted, in the words of the Washington Post, by the ongoing defense of Israel and support for Ukraine.
And of course, we are seeing protests re-emerge in Iran.
That's true. So it's the time where students have gone back to university. It is also a moment in the calendar of mourning in Shia Islam, where on the 40th day after death, so we are at about that point after the 8th and 9th of January, when there was a huge amount of bloodshed in Iran, where there are funerals taking place, important mourning rites, and also the students are back at university. And what we've seen is that across university campuses and also at funerals, there has been this rise again in protest, something that is really striking when you consider how much the regime has done to essentially unleash deadly violence on anyone protesting since the beginning of the year.
Let's turn to Britain, but more widely speaking, back to the Epstein files, which never seem to be far away from the headlines. This is the arrest of Lord Peter Mandelson, which is making headlines around the world. He's now been released on bail, but there's no downplaying just what a senior figure in the British government he has been for decades. Just unpick this a little for us.
Yes, I mean, this is making headlines around the world, I think, not just because of, as you say, the ongoing fallout of the information in the Epstein files, but just how important a figure Peter Mandelson has been for the past 2-3 decades in British politics. ABC News Australia calling him among the most influential figures in British politics, rising to prominence as an MP and a minister in the 90s and 2000s. And then mentioning, such was his power, he became known as the Prince of Darkness by his colleagues. And so little surprise, really, that given his power, there's also plenty of mention in the German media, in Der Spiegel, in the French media, Le Monde, ABC News Australia also mentioning this, which is what this will do for Keir Starmer. ABC News calling the accusations surrounding Lord Mandelson catastrophic for Keir Starmer. Der Spiegel mentioning that this entire thing is putting Keir Starmer under pressure, which is really putting it lightly, and also mentioning that the arrest of the former Prince Andrew Mountbatten Windsor just a few days ago also as part of the same set of accusations of misconduct in public office, has shaken the British monarchy.
I'm loving the way that the British are dealing with this with quite a lot of humour. As you say, Mr. Mountbatten Windsor, formerly Prince Andrew, and now we're hearing about Peter Mandelson, now Mr. Darkness, no longer the Prince of Darkness, and a lot of memes coming out about that iconic, and I hate to use the word, but it really is, picture of Prince Andrew or formerly Prince Andrew in the back of a police car. Did we get any similar images of Mandelson leaving police custody?
Yes, and not just leaving police custody, but returning from it in an effort to kind of pursue, another, as you say, iconic picture. So the arrest was caught on camera, footage broadcast by the BBC, mentioned by the New York Times, showing him being led from his home in Camden into an unmarked police car by plainclothes police officers. Interesting addition by the New York Times here. Mr. Mandelson was not handcuffed and was carrying a bottle of water, important detail, and then mention by the BBC of him returning to his home at 2 a.m. London time.
Wow, so a long day for Mandelson, but honestly, a long years to come, and not just for him and Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, but for everybody caught up in those Epstein files. They just keep revealing more information.
It is striking. I mean, it's also that I think as journalists, we still don't know all the information that's in there. There's millions of files. There is the expectation that there will be more information released. The BBC mentioning that that the British government is expecting to release the first documents relating specifically to Lord Mandelson's appointment in early March. So that's another set of documentation, arguments around that set of documentation that are going to, keep this rolling. And yeah, the information continues to come out, and so it seems do the arrests and potential accusations related to it,
and the ramifications, of course, for Keir Starmer. Just before we go, I want to look at, well, as we know that the Winter Olympics have just ended, but Japan is a group of Japanese players are trying to turn what is really a childish game, I suppose, for many people, into an Olympic sport. Tell us about snowball fighting.
Yes, this is yukigassen, which apparently means snowball fight in Japanese. I think these Japanese players would argue that this is not a childish game, but instead an extremely important winter sport where the goal is to hit all 7 players on the opposing team using perfectly spherical snowballs made with a special machine. So sounds pretty serious. This actually was a game, the yukigassen was created as a first international tournament that took place in 1989. The sport spread to Australia. You would think there's not a lot of snowballs there, as reported by AFP, and then to Finland. Okay, more snow there, which set up a national federation in 1995. But in this effort to get this taken up by the Olympic Committee, there's a consideration that maybe they'll have to move it onto sand or to adapt the game in some way that means it's not being played with snow.
So sandballs?
I mean, apparently, but this is reported in the Korean Chosun Daily that there is a challenge lying in the barrier to getting into the Olympics, and they are trying to get recognition from the International Olympic Committee. You would think, I suppose that also means the International Winter Olympic Committee, expand the registered athlete pool, and that the sport has to apparently partially sever its connection to snow. So they are developing artificial balls, standardized replacements for snowballs, to allow the competition to be held in snowless venues or even on beaches.
Right. We both know this makes no sense. We're going to move on. Ruth, thank you very much indeed. That's Ruth Michelson, journalist and Middle East correspondent in Istanbul. This is The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Now, here's what else we're keeping an eye on today. Canada says it's drawing up assistance plans for Cuba as the United States intensifies sanctions aimed at cutting off all oil supplies to the island. The United Nations has warned that prolonged energy shortages could trigger a humanitarian crisis marked by blackouts, food price spikes and transport disruptions. France has banned US Ambassador Charles Kushner from direct contact with senior officials after he failed to appear at the Foreign Ministry over controversial embassy remarks. The move underscores growing diplomatic strain after US statements on a politically charged killing in France's domestic debate. And Lord Peter Mandelson has been released on bail after being arrested by London police on suspicion of misconduct in public office. The investigation centres on claims he passed sensitive government information to Jeffrey Epstein while serving as a cabinet minister in the UK government. Allegations he denies. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. It's 13:30 in Diego Garcia and 8:30 in Zurich. Following decades of dispute, in 2025, the United Kingdom agreed to hand over its last African colony, the Chagos Islands, to Mauritius. The deal stipulates that Britain retains control over the military base on Diego Garcia, which it operates jointly with the United States. However, though he initially supported the deal, Donald Trump now opposes the return of the islands, saying it would be a big mistake for Britain to get rid of them. Well, there's now some doubt as to whether the deal will actually go through after all. So I'm joined by the writer and broadcaster Ash Bajwaj to have a look at all of this. Ash, why has Trump U-turned over this deal? He seemed so supportive.
Well, a quick thing on why it really matters that Trump either supports or doesn't support the deal. We're in this situation because America effectively asked Britain to do this. The United States, when they saw the empire was ending, wanted to have this base here. It's a very important base. It's got reach for navies and aircraft into several different theatres the US wants to operate in, particularly the Indo-Pacific, Southeast Asia. But it's also great for intelligence, signals intelligence, satellite monitoring, all those sorts of things that are vital. And the UK is allowed to access it because it was through this deal that the UK did originally, splitting the Chagos Islands off from Mauritius, which was jointly administered as part of the British Empire, that allowed that to happen. So the UK knew that whatever happened, it would have to effectively get approval from the United States to continue doing whatever deal it made in order to access that intelligence, because that's what the UK really, really wants. And it seems that Trump originally turned on this because Keir Starmer and the UK government objected to Trump's efforts to try and take Greenland off Denmark. And if you remember, that was based on this idea that Trump thought that it wasn't good enough that he could use Greenland, that he could effectively lease the space on the bases. He wanted to own it, which is the same challenge in the Chagos Islands. But it was the United States government that pushed the UK into making a deal so that they could retain use of Diego Garcia, because the fear is that if they don't go through with this deal, which is based on an ICJ advisory note, that they could lose control over the outlying islands. So China could put bases on those outlying islands and interfere with what the US and through them the UK are doing on Diego Garcia.
So what does this ultimately mean for relations between the US and the UK?
It's a real problem because the UK feels that it's gone down this direction. And then the second U-turn, so eventually the US said that they would go ahead with this deal, they'd support it, but then Trump changed his mind again when the UK said they weren't happy with the US using Diego Garcia for potential strikes on Iran. So it's fractious. It makes the UK look silly because the UK has been pushed into a deal on the back of particularly the former administration, but also this administration up until Trump's U-turn. And it just shows how difficult it is to do foreign policy and security policy in an era where your primary security ally might change its opinion quite quickly.
What about the Chagosians themselves? Does anybody taking any notice of what they want?
Well, the Chagosians, they're effectively, the islands weren't inhabited until the British occupied it, and the people who became the Chagosians were the descendants of enslaved peoples and indentured servitude peoples. And they were forced off Diego Garcia to build this base. Many of them went to Mauritius, but the Chagosians don't really want this deal to go ahead. They'd rather stay part of the British Indian Ocean Territory, which is under UK sovereignty. So there have been some Chagosians who have effectively moved to the island and encamped on it, but not Diego Garcia, one of the other islands, and encamped on it in order to push the narrative about their position of not wanting to see this deal with Mauritius go through.
So how is this being used within British domestic politics? Because Nigel Farage and his Reform Party have got very publicly involved, and there's a lot of misinformation surrounding this.
Yeah, Nigel Farage did one of his boat stunts a little while ago where he went down to the Chagos Islands and complained that he couldn't get to a particular place because the UK government wouldn't allow him. But it's unusual in that you are seeing international relations and foreign policy being leveraged internally for domestic gain. And both in the United States and in the UK, whatever dispute there was between political parties, we tended to maintain a fairly coherent front on international relations. But it is being leveraged by the far right and alt-right. And actually, one of the things that's happened is people like Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, both former prime ministers, actually the UK deal was initiated under Liz Truss. And I believe actually Johnson was part of the time when it was being negotiated. They have been trying to leverage it in the United States to try and change the Trump administration's mind.
So there is a meeting going on today in Port Louis between Mauritius and the US. What more do we know about it? I mean, does the US have the power to scupper this deal?
So this was actually initiated as a round of talks before Trump's latest U-turn. So it was just something that was happening. So the UK's fear is that the US will cut them out of a deal. That's why the UK wanted to go ahead with this. The US's initial fear was that if they didn't adhere to the ICJ initial acknowledgement and note, that they would lose control of the outlying islands. But if the US decides to cut a deal directly with Mauritius to retain control of the base and the British lose access to that base, well, then the US has a deal with Mauritius, and it depends on whether or not Mauritius then decides to push through with its ICJ ruling. I think if the US unilaterally just decided to ignore what's happening with the ICJ, then you end up with a position where one of the international treaties, the law of the sea, is being contested everywhere or ignored everywhere. That's not necessarily good for stability. And the law of the sea is about international trading routes. But also you just end up with Chinese bases on the outlying islands and they wouldn't be able to do anything about it.
And I mean, something that we mustn't ignore is the fact that Britain has said that America cannot use Diego Garcia to attack Iran.
Yeah, and I think that's part of why Trump is pushing ahead with this. And I think it might incentivize Trump and the Trump administration in particular to try and cut a deal directly with Mauritius, in which case the UK would lose access to this vital source of intelligence, which is really why the UK is stuck with it.
Ash, thank you very much indeed. That's writer and broadcaster Ash Bhardwaj. Thank you. This is Monocle Radio. $15.37 in Manila, 8:37 in The Hague. The former leader of the Philippines, Rodrigo Duterte, is accused of crimes against humanity. This pertains to an anti-drugs crackdown during which thousands were killed between 2011 and 2019. Duterte's pre-trial hearing is taking place at The Hague this week to determine if there is sufficient evidence to take the case forward. Duterte himself is not in attendance, but Janet Anderson, president of the Association of Journalists at the International Criminal Court, is. Janet, you are there. Duterte is not. Why not?
Hi, Georgina. Well, his lawyers asked that he be able to stay home, in this case, just up the road in the prison in Scheveningen, because he's not well enough to attend. And the judges said, fine, no problems. The result of that, I mean, the major result that I saw was that the contingent of journalists coming here was reduced by maybe half. But on the other hand, the contingent of Filipino lobbyists, people who represent victims, all the NGOs, they were still out in force.
So can you tell us exactly what he's accused of and what he said previously about supporting extrajudicial killings? I mean, he was being very explicit about the fact that this was happening.
I think explicit is a really good word to use. They played yesterday in the court a very explicit clip, not in relation to killing so much, but his reaction to the International Criminal Court itself, where he used very strong language to describe the judges. And that was played directly directly for the judges to hear. What he's been charged with is 3 counts of crimes against humanity. For crimes against humanity, it has to be part of a plan in some form, that they call that systematic, and it has to be widespread, so it has to happen over quite a large area. The 3 counts are of murder and attempted murder. They range from the time when he was the mayor of a particular town called Davao, to the time when he was lobbying, he was campaigning to be president. They're using a lot of that period as well, because that's the time when he was making promises about implementing what he had done in Davao in the rest of the Philippines, and then the times when he was the president. The accusations concern the creation of a death squad, the Davao Death Squad, the DDS, and then how that when he became president, where he was for 6 years, he used the same methodology, that he paid people, that he intimidated people, and that he promoted people, all to commit murders on his behalf. Those are the allegations.
And what's he said about this arrest?
I think the arrest itself was live streamed essentially on Facebook as he was traveling to The Hague. I mean, the Philippines is an extraordinary place in terms of social media and the amounts of people who are following all of these kind of political developments. The arrest itself came, for a long time, the ICC has said that they wanted to get him. The Philippines actually withdrew from the International Criminal Court, but the court still had jurisdiction over up until the time that they withdrew. And then the political kind of stars aligned in the sense that there are 2 major dynasties running the Philippines, and they fell out. One is run by the president, which is the Marcos family. The other is the vice president, so Duterte's own daughter, who's the vice president. They fell out, and as a result, Papa Duterte got shoved onto a plane and sent to The Hague.
How are Filipinos, particularly the families of the victims, reacting?
I was just reading this morning the reaction of families of victims who are here in The Hague and talking to media. Their reactions to the defence counsel of Duterte yesterday. That's a British-Israeli lawyer, Nick Kaufman, who was saying things like, he actually supported law and order that the prosecution have cherry-picked elements from his speeches. He may have said occasionally, sort of in his flowery and flamboyant language, things, but if you check the rest of what he said in his speeches, he was a strong supporter of law and order, and that's what this campaign was really all about. It was about restoring law and order to the Philippines. And then you have the reaction of the families who are speaking to anyone who will listen to them at the moment, saying, this is not true. This is not what happened to my son, my daughter, my husband, my uncle, etc. They were killed in cold blood. They were shot down. They had no due process. There was, nobody told them that they deserved to be put on trial for being a drug dealer. They were just shot.
So this is the pre-trial hearing. When will the next steps be announced?
This takes this week. They'd actually very deliberately made it a very tight schedule, and they've got a day off in the middle because, it's meant to be an elderly man in the dock who's not there now. So that's interesting. So it's 4 days worth. Then the judges, there are 3 judges involved. They will consider over the next 60 working days, so that works out to about 3 months, whether there is sufficient evidence. My guess is, it's fairly low standard in terms of sufficient evidence. My guess is, yes, this will go to trial.
Janet, thank you very much indeed. That's Janet Anderson, President of the Association of Journalists at the International Criminal Court in The Hague. This is The Globalist on Monocle Radio.
IQ, EQ and AI. 3 components key to the craft of innovation at UBS. Because to stay ahead in a rapidly evolving age, you need a partner with decades of experience, endless passion for the work, and a finger on the pulse of leading technologies, bridging human expertise with artificial intelligence, all to elevate you. UBS. Banking is our craft.
Lebanon, once dubbed the Switzerland of the Middle East, is today synonymous with political upheaval and violence. Since the outbreak of civil war in 1975, the coastal nation, which neighbours Israel and Syria, has seemed perpetually caught between crisis and revival. Now, in a new documentary entitled Do You Love Me?, filmmaker Lena Daha attempts to make sense of Lebanon through decades of archive footage of the capital, Beirut. Monocle's producer Hassan Anderson sat down with Lana at Midori House to find out more. He began by asking why she turned to film when attempting to map out her country's past.
So in Lebanon, at schools, we don't have any history books in our curriculum, no updated history books. Most of the history books stop in 1948 and a few of them stop in the 60s. But from the 70s onwards, we actually don't have any history books and they're not taught in school. At the same time, we don't really have a national archive. And so I had a desire to sort of work with archives to access images and stories that I felt that I wasn't able to receive, neither in school nor at home, actually. I also felt growing up that the generation of my parents had a lot of difficulty speaking about the past, and it was just not spoken of. The Civil War, everything that happened was not really discussed. And so there was a desire to kind of understand and see what had happened. And at the same time, I did not want to tell a linear history. And the more I researched, the more I understood that the film was also very much about childhood, about trauma, about memory and how we remember, about our identity as Lebanese people. And so I kind of just found a form in the film that to me is a sort of history, an alternative history. It's just not a very linear or very traditional one.
That process of forgetting is explored in your film. And there seems to be maybe not a definitive answer given on how you feel about it. I just wonder if there's something in the Lebanese psyche that looks to forget to survive. What's your view on that? And how do you see this idea of trying to build a better contemporary history with a film like this?
I definitely feel that we need to understand our past and really acknowledge it in order to sort of build a better future. So that was definitely one of the reasons why I wanted to make a film that kind of encompassed like 70 years of archival material from Lebanon. But at the same time, when I started working on this film, I had a lot of ideas that transformed throughout the process. On one end, I thought that we were much more united, and the reality of that was very difficult for me to accept. But also, I used to be a bit more judgmental about who we are as Lebanese, and with age and time and after really witnessing through these archives what we've been through, that actually we're extremely unique, extremely courageous. It's very, very difficult to go what you go through in Lebanon and to still be able to live there, and even if you leave, to still be able to have a connection with where you're from. And so I think that I'm less judgmental about what we forget and what we remember, because as you said, it's somewhat a survival mechanism.
Just going back to process for a second, because you went through a remarkable amount of hours of footage, 20,000 hours, I believe. What was the starting point like for deciding what's going to go in the sequence? It's non-linear, so again, that's another challenge for you.
Well, for the final editing process, I had an amazing partner with me, Kutaiba Barhamji. The editing of the film was something that I started doing from very, very early on. I did massive amounts of research, and I had all kinds of timelines in my premiere project. I had sequences of the chronology of the Civil War, the chronology of all the wars from the late 50s until now. I had also sequences that had thematics, for example, cats or cars, outside to inside of the car, inside to outside, rain, the sea, guns, kids. And every one of these thematics had, like, again, a range of images, because kids could be either a kid with a gun or it could be just, children who are victims of war. So I had an insane amount of research that I tried to categorize and organize over and over again. So up until the last editing session, we were constantly rewriting and writing and building and putting it together.
It's remarkable. Yeah. It's remarkable. It's taken what, 10 years to finalise this?
Almost. It was about, I would say, like 9 years up until it premiered in Venice last September.
I'm impressed you're here and still sane, I have to say.
Not sure about the sane part, but still here, yes.
Just finally, I'm speaking to you as somebody whose father is from Beirut, whose life was kind of torn apart by the Lebanese civil war and continues to be fragmented and pushed away from his closest family. I was very moved by your film. What do you hope someone who's not Lebanese takes away from this film? And is there something to be addressed there beyond that collective psyche?
Well, I mean, so far, because I haven't shown the film in Lebanon yet, the premiere is going to be early April, but the film has been to over 15 festivals so far, all abroad. And of course, there's been some Lebanese people at these festivals, but most of them have been foreigners who either have visited Beirut and love it or have never been there. And they've really been able to connect with the film. And they've been able to compare the experience that they witnessed through the film, the experience of Lebanon. They've been able to compare it to a lot of other parts of the world where there's a similar conflict because of religion, conflict because of all these outside sort of, superpowers that are trying to influence regions that they don't belong in. And so I just feel that it does have this bigger message. And this bigger message of how actually complicated and unjust the world we live in is. Geopolitically, I think that things are a complete disaster, and it doesn't really make me hopeful, but I think that's why we end up making art.
One of the things that I felt was great that you were championing was the dance sequence. I guess this sort of like irrepressible ability to find joy in things that I would say the Lebanese have developed.
Absolutely, and the Lebanese are party animals. I mean, we love to live, basically, much more than we love to die. It's human nature, and also I think, this is not a good thing, but I think that when you've lived in Lebanon for too long, you actually somebody needs to test our DNA, because I think you get to like a place where you kind of adapt to certain conditions, and you just find a way to survive in the most, difficult situations. And so it's a part of who we are.
That was Lebanese filmmaker Lana Daha in conversation with Monocle's Hassan Anderson. The film Do You Love Me is out now. You're listening to The Globalist on Monocle Radio. And to end the show, let's have a roundup of aviation news. And for that, I'm joined by Gabriel Lee, Monocle's transport correspondent in Stockholm. Gabriel, we're hearing about all sorts of flight difficulties in North America. This is mostly due to weather. Is that affecting you too in Stockholm? Or are the Swedes just better at dealing with inclement weather?
The Swedes are famously good at dealing with inclement weather. They have an incredible team that removes snow at the airport in Stockholm, at Arlanda. I think across the Nordics you find that as well. But the bad weather over in the East Coast U.S. they're calling it historic, and with good reason. It's a very serious storm. I think even here they would struggle to cope with that situation.
And how badly has it impacted travel there?
Last I heard, several thousand flights canceled. Basically, New York has become impossible to fly in and out of for a time. And there was a lot of advanced preparation. They knew this was coming. A lot of airlines like JetBlue, which has a huge operation at JFK, they plan to basically stop all travel there and at area airports as well for a period of about 48 hours so that nobody got stuck on planes, that kind of thing. So I think they've handled it well, but definitely not a time you want to be flying in and out of there.
Or in or out of Mexico either. The weather might be sunny there, but lots of flights have been cancelled due to the unrest.
Right. It just shows you how various things can suddenly impact aviation in a serious way. That's a very unusual situation, of course, even with sort of violence as we know it being a thing in Mexico that they have to contend with like this. But to have a situation like that where basically these airports in Puerto Vallarta, for example, had to just shut down movement altogether. Quite shocking to see that.
Now, Gabe, there's been a bizarre rumour circulating, which I've not seen corroborated officially anywhere, and one wouldn't normally report this, but it would be potentially enormously important. And these are rumours that Canada has closed its airspace to the US and saying that the US has to get flight-by-flight permission to overfly the country. Now, if that were true, that would add huge amounts of expense onto every single flight and enormous amounts of red tape. Do we know what the situation is?
I haven't heard that to be something that's really happening. There's been a lot of news about the drop in demand for air travel, especially Canadians not wanting to visit the US. A lot of airlines in Canada cutting flights to the US. But to close off airspace entirely, that's a pretty huge move in geopolitical terms. And even as much as the tension is high between those two countries politically at the moment, I can't imagine that Canada would go to that length.
Tell us more, though, about Canadian Airlines slashing flights to the US.
Yeah, it's a very serious cut we're seeing. I mean, I think it's around sort of, 18, 19% of flights between Canada and the US have been cut by Canadian airlines. Most notably, Air Transat has said basically as of June, we're going to stop flying to the US. So that was kind of the most impactful in terms of just the symbolic weight of that. But you see also Air Canada, WestJet, other airlines in Canada saying they're just going to cut flights because it's just an economic move. It's for them, they can't fill the seats. Because Canadians are traveling less to the US and vice versa, I think also.
So this is an economic decision because there just is no demand anymore. Canadians are choosing not to go there.
That's right. They're not making a political statement with this. They're just saying, look, people aren't buying the seats on these flights, so we're going to stop.
Right. However, on Emirates, people are buying more expensive seats, and Emirates is adapting by removing seats from its high-density A330s, which I think were the planes with the most seats in the world, at 615? Tell us how they're adapting and why.
Yeah, I mean, it's just something we've seen as a trend for several years now, that premium travel demand, especially sort of that middle of the market, premium economy, kind of a little bit more expensive, maybe not business first class, is very much in demand. Emirates has been moving to put premium economy on all of its aircraft. And now we're seeing that these famously high density aircraft, which were the most capacitous in the world, it was the only commercial aircraft we had flying with over 600 seats. They are deciding to take out a bunch of seats. Basically, they're adding in more expensive seats. So they're taking out quite a bit of economy. They're adding premium economy and they're adding business class seats. And this is just in line with something that we see across the board pretty much everywhere, that airlines are moving towards having more of these seats that they can charge more for, basically.
Well, I bet passengers on a Lufthansa flight in Munich wish they were all in business class with a lie flat seat because they have had a very uncomfortable night. Tell us about this extraordinary story.
Yeah, this was a really rough one, and it's actually starting to pick up a lot of momentum in Germany right now with a lot of people rightly asking, how could this possibly happen? Basically, it turns out that in the end, it was 6 different flights that were sent out to depart. They lifted their night curfew at Munich temporarily in order to get these planes out. It was heavy snowfall at the time. The aircraft weren't able to depart. And in the end, the passengers on these airplanes, many of which were European flights. So there was one long haul, I believe, and the rest were European flights. So you're talking very basic seats, right? Even in business class, they all had to spend the night on the airplane. And that's because apparently they couldn't return the aircraft to the gate. There were no gates and there were no bus drivers left to come and get the passengers. So basically the choice was sleep on the plane or nothing. And it's causing quite a bit of outrage now as the story spreads and we get more details about it. They're even looking into, the government is looking into whether there may be sort of criminal consequences here in terms of just sort of abandoning duty of care for passengers. Obviously a complicated situation, but really surprising that could be allowed to happen.
Because, of course, if they're short-haul flights, there's no food on board, there's no blankets. It must have been extremely uncomfortable. And this comes down to bureaucracy, that there weren't people there with the right qualifications or whatever to operate the ground control needed to get those passengers out.
Right. We're still learning the sort of details of exactly why it was that, you couldn't find one bus driver to get these passengers to the terminal, things like that. But, and they say that the passengers were looked after. It was warm on board, that kind of thing. But yeah, it must have been an awful time. And I, for one, would have been, infuriated by being in that situation. So yeah, it'll be interesting to learn more about how that exactly came to be.
Absolutely. Gabriel, thank you very much indeed. I'm kind of regretting you weren't on one of those flights because we could have heard from you live as it was unfolding.
That would have been good, yes, I agree.
Gabriel Lee, Monocle's transport correspondent in Stockholm, thank you very much for joining us. And that's all for today's programme. Thanks to our producers, Carlotta Rabella, Angelica Jobson and Hassan Anderson. Our researcher, Annalise Maynard, and our studio manager is Christy O'Grady. After the headlines, there's more music on the way. Look out for Meet the Writers. Today I speak to one of the activists from Pussy Riot on the 4th anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. The briefing is live at midday in London, and The Globalist will return at the same time tomorrow. I'm Georgina Godwin. Thank you for listening.